we're going to be responding to Dragon Demands. We're going to get to the news portion first and then respond to a commentary he's making on essentially how Benioff and Weiss decided to frame actors within Game of Thrones. So the news portion is pretty short and simple. Basically, that Game of Thrones is going to be coming to Broadway. Again, that's interesting news, though I don't quite see how it's so cosmically important. But Dragon Demands has a kind of commentary where he tries to argue that actually this is very important for us as GOT fans. So we'll let him speak and then respond to his argument and commentary.
They thought the faces, the tight close-ups, and I've been pointing this out since after season 6. It got so bad that casual viewers with no knowledge of all these behind-the-scenes quotes were recognizing it by season 8. And those who were following my channel were going, dear God, you predicted it all along. There's just these long tracking shots and they say, we're playing it off of Tyrion's face. It's amazing in a tight close-up. That the whole thing is just these long staring contests of, we don't need a dialogue scene of Sansa and Arya reacting to Jon Snow explaining who his real parents are. Let's cut to just Sansa on the walls with no dialogue, stunned, a tight close-up on her face crying. These performances and these faces, that's what we're showing off. It's you're riding the coattails of celebrity actor faces, which is actually hobbling their acting performance. And this has been a problem since the pilot. I mean, if you remember, I relatively recently put out a new video on Tamsin Merchant's experience on the pilot, and we're in that idiotic interview book James Hibbard put out. They revealed, yeah, the failed pilot was like that. There weren't any wide shots in it. You couldn't see that we had bothered to spend so much money on sets and filming on location because they're so obsessed with close-ups that not even from an artistic standpoint, purely from a money standpoint, a pragmatic standpoint from the studio, all of their executives complaining, you could have filmed this in a parking lot. Why did we go to Malta? Why did we film it on location in castles? There's just all these tight close-ups on actor faces because you're obsessed with it, because you're an actor fanboy. Well, after my crusade against these performances, these faces, a theater production inherently cannot have close-ups on actor faces. Really think about that. That the actors have to act with their whole body. And in addition to that, it'd be pretty weird to just play it off of people's silent reactions for a really long time with no dialogue. Yeah, there are points where you have a silent reaction by someone, but not to the same extent. But the bigger point is you can't cheat using the cameras for vanity shots of the lead actors' faces with tight close-ups. And we needed to be cured of that. It's not a visual language Benioff and Weiss has, it's the absence of language. That people got used to saying, oh, this is shot so great, and it's, no, they put a lot of expensive crap on the screen and then zoomed in on the faces. This is terrible camera work. And
No, I'm with you.
Oh, really?
I'm with you with about 40 asterisks.
Okay, I'm with him sort of halfway. I understand what he's getting at, namely that they weren't very good at utilizing the actors within their storylines, and they focused on these very shallow techniques such as the extreme close-up. And this has been an issue since season 1, where they had a lot of close-ups and basically almost destroyed the show because the pilot was unusable because the studio thought they were going to get a lot of wide shots and they didn't get those with the foreign locations, so they just wasted a whole lot of money. However, I'm not with him with this whole objectivity nonsense. We can talk about objective definitions till the cows come home, but when we're dealing with fiction, we're really not dealing with any rules. Let me just give a very small example. Let's take somebody like James Joyce. Now, we take for granted that with a novel, we have characters, and they do things, right? Things happen, we see the characters evolve. But if we read something like Ulysses or Finnegan's Wake, you'd be very hard-pressed to figure out, well, what the hell is happening or how much action is occurring, or even if these qualify as characters. They just seem like mythic archetypes. They don't seem to have any complexity that we would assign characters. So we can take somebody like Joyce and say, well, in these novels, nothing is occurring, so these don't qualify as novels, but clearly they are novels. This may be novels that are not written the way you want them to, but they do qualify as novels. So the same thing with these techniques. The extreme close-up, like anything else, can be misused, and I think they did misuse it, and he provides a lot of evidence, and we're going to get into Battle of the Bastards when the time's appropriate. But I don't think you want to argue, well, because they abused the technique, therefore the technique is bad, or that there's an objective line that if you don't have wide shots, then you don't have cinema. You can have cinema within a very small space, right? The Hateful Eight is a good example. And if you look at Kubrick's work, he often played back and forth with this in terms of, using extreme close-ups, then not using them, using the long take, then not using it, so on and so forth. So just because Benioff and Weiss use this technique a little too much or too shallowly doesn't mean it's a bad technique or don't use it. In fact, I would defend them actually with the final episode. I thought the very, very long take with Tyrion just sort of walking and just looking and not saying anything and focusing on his face was good. I thought that was very powerful. So I think the first 15 minutes actually makes a lot of sense. But afterwards, it really doesn't go anywhere. And a lot of people kept complaining, there's no dialogue. There's almost no dialogue, as if they'd never heard of silent film, right? There is a whole category of film where literally you don't have any dialogue. So I'm not quite sure what these people are saying. It seems like their paradigm is something like Terminator 2, or I guess Friday the 13th, or Nightmare on Elm Street. They consider that great cinema because it has a lot of characters, it has a lot of dialogue, it has a lot of action. And I don't have any problem with those films, but just because a film does not follow, quote, the Scream kind of pattern doesn't tell me it's bad. So I agree with them in the spirit. They abused those techniques, and they did fall in love with the actors, and they kind of destroyed the stories in doing so. I don't agree that we have this objective line. And therefore, just because they misuse the extreme close-up doesn't tell me the extreme close-up is a bad thing. But that's where I stand. So I understand where he's coming from, that they're not going to have the magical tricks of with camera on Broadway. But I'm not so sure we're going to get a better story necessarily. But that's my opinion. All right, this has been GRRM and Thrones Analyzed on Dragon Demands Better Cinema from D&D. Thanks for listening.